My grandma died and passed down her cabin to my brother and me. My uncle's done something terrible to my brother and father, and now I'm all that's left. Let's get straight into that. I stared at my father in disbelief. It felt wrong seeing him like this, glassy-eyed, groaning and hardly able to keep himself upright. He had always been such a force in my life, or at least an immovable object. Nothing seemed to sway him. He was bulletproof. Now though, freed of his ropes, he groaned and his body lurched forward. I caught him as he fell and something slipped out of his open jacket. The syringe. I thought Jake used it to inject Eric, but this one, it was full. No, of course Dad wouldn't have given it to him. He'd never jeopardize Eric's life. The lab had probably been full of doses like this one, and Jake had taken his pack while I was unconscious. I helped Dad onto the floor, laying him on his side so he couldn't fall again, or choke on his vomit if it came to it. And then I looked back to the needle. My heart thundered as I reached for it. It takes several doses to induce the transformation. Nolan's words echoed in my head as I gripped the syringe. An emerald green fluid swam inside of it, the tip of its needle covered with a thin plastic cap. I swallowed, looking back to my dad. He lay on the floor, a trail of spittle falling from his open mouth onto the hard wood. Every few moments he would twitch, sometimes his legs, sometimes his arms, and sometimes his neck. Is this what the serum did to him? I slipped it inside my jacket. Jake knows, I said quietly. I wasn't sure if I was talking to myself or him. That's why he's done this to you. He knows Nolan's dead, and so he's turning you into one of them. I became aware of the weight of the dagger on my belt, the feeling of its cool silver against my thigh. He needs you to summon Predium. I couldn't let that happen. Dad's eyes rolled in his head, but I knew he was looking at me, or trying to. His voice was nearly gone now, barely there beneath the moans of pain. He was becoming one of them, a monster. Matthew, he said, please. I raced through the woods, hardly aware of the bushes and the brambles scratching at my face. I knew where I needed to go now, beyond any shadow of a doubt. The river was where we had met Nolan. It was where he'd given us the book, and it was where our nightmare began. And it was where it would end. I leapt over a fallen tree, landed in a puddle of mud with a cold splash. I shivered as it sprayed up and over me, but the sensation was gone as soon as it had come. I didn't have time to be cold, to be distracted. I needed to get to Eric. At my pace, and with the help of the night vision goggles, it didn't take me long to reach the river. When I did, I positioned myself behind a large, thick berry bush. At my proximity, it was enough for me to see through the bramble, but not enough to be seen at a distance. I twisted the focus on the goggles, zeroing in on them on the shore. Eric stood just short of the water, his back to me and his hands at his sides. He was still as a tree and silent, gazing out over the dark river. I parted the brush enough to get a clearer view of the shoreline. No sign of Jake. Damn. Without seeing him first, I couldn't prepare for him, and if I couldn't prepare for him, then I didn't have a chance. I chewed my lip nervously. Maybe Jake wasn't here. Maybe he'd gone off to do something for his bullshit ritual and left Eric alone. Maybe I could approach Eric now and the two of us could get in Jake's truck and tear out of here. No, that would be too easy, too obvious. Besides, Jake knew I was still alive. And if he had wanted me dead, he would have made sure of it. Was he waiting for me then? Fuck. I was always horrible when it came to passing through this planning shit. I stared at my brother for several long moments, wondering what he would do if the roles were reversed. And then a thought struck me. Why wasn't he running, trying to make a break for it? Eric was all alone out there. Unless he wasn't. A twig snapped in the distance, and somewhere along the riverbank, and the hairs on the back of my neck stood on end. I swallowed, holding onto the dagger with a vice grip. Another snap of a branch, followed by the shuffling sound of parting brush. Jake lumbered from the other end of the tree line. He carried a black bag, tucked neatly under one of his massive brown arms. Christ, he looked rough. His eye sockets were 2 red gaping holes, and while his body was covered in fur, matted by layers of crimson, my heart raced in anticipation. I had them both in my sight now. I just needed an opening, an opportunity to plunge the dagger into Jake's heart. Easier said than done.
"Can you feel him, Eric?"
Jake said, his voice more raspy than before. The shotgun blast may not have killed him, but it seemed to have slowed him down some. He sounded pained, and his movements looked sluggish. He stopped short of Eric and dropped a garbage bag on the stone shore with a dull thump.
"He's on his way, nearly here."
He leaned down and untied the top of the bag with a sigh.
"When this is all over with, you'll thank me. It's a real honor, I'm telling you."
Eric didn't say anything, but slumped his head forward. His silhouette, stark in the black of the night, looked like a portrait of defeat. He'd given up. Maybe he had the right idea. I was too stubborn, though, by about 10 miles. Jake reached into the garbage bag and pulled something out, something large. I narrowed my eyes at it and then choked back a retch. It was a corpse, one mostly rotten, its flesh blue and black, and with fungus growing all over its face. And I knew that face.
"Ma would have wanted to see this,"
Jake explained to Eric.
"She spent her life trying to make it happen."
I brought a hand to my mouth, feeling sick to my stomach. That was Grandma's corpse. He had kept it this whole time. "What are we buried at a funeral?"
"There,"
he said, sitting Grandma up against a large rock.
"I told you I'd make it happen, Ma."
He ran a finger through her brittle grey hair and then slowly lowered himself next to her.
"And soon you'll be able to rest, Ma. I swear on that."
I recoiled, the sight making me nauseous. Jake was more monstrous inside than out. First, he'd killed Grandma, and now he was parading her corpse around like a doll at the kids' tea party. I squeezed the dagger and took a deep breath, and then another. I can do this, I told myself. I have to do this. It didn't seem like there'd be a better opportunity. The way he sat now, looking towards Eric and the river, meant his back was to me. The trouble was, he was sitting in the damn near centre of the stone shore. Getting over there without making a sound would be hard, maybe impossible, with the rocks wet from the storm. They were likely to slip and shift. Damn it, think, Matt. I ran a hand through my hair, considering the various ways this scenario might play out. In each of them, Jake turned around, found me, and beat me to death. I looked at Eric, who remained as still and as silent as ever. If our roles were reversed, he'd have known what to do. That was his whole shtick, planning shit out and not paying a price for being an impulsive moron. Still, it was a role somebody had to fill. I said a quiet prayer and then moved from the brush as silently as I could. The forest floor was loamy and soft, ideal for my sneakers to live up to their namesake. The stone beach, on the other hand, I paused upon reaching it, gazing forward with the goggles. Jake still hadn't moved, though it sounded like he was whispering something to Grandma's corpse. A shiver ran through me, and I ignored it. This was far from the weirdest shit I'd seen all night. Shake it off, Matt. I stared at the slick stones and swallowed. One stray pebble clacking against another would quite literally jeopardize everything. I had to do this carefully, perfectly.
"Go on, Eric,"
Jake said. The sound of his voice nearly made my heart beat out of my chest.
"Welcome him home."
I don't think we should, Eric said. Have you thought this through? What do you really know about Predium? His voice was uneven, stuttering and anxious. Good. That meant he was still my brother.
I've thought about this for decades.
Jake growled.
I know you're a good kid, Eric. I know that. Which is why I made you his host.
His massive, furry hand tousled grandma's decaying hair.
Ma always felt it should have been Matty, but he's too much of a shit, you know? And pretty young. Or he deserves the best.
Eric whimpered, his fingers dancing at his sides.
Still now,
Jake said.
I told you to stay still.
I know, I just... What if Prettium isn't what you think he is? What if he's going to do something terrible? Jake chuckled, and when he spoke his voice was laced with menace.
He'll do plenty of terrible things, I'll bet. But sometimes terrible is necessary. You and I, Eric, we can't possibly understand something like him. Something so much greater than us. Greater than anything.
Eric didn't move. He didn't speak. He just watched the river, his messy hair caught in a dying storm's breeze.
He'll save us,
Jake said solemnly.
But first, we need to welcome him home. Now go on, say his name, guide him.
Eric, he was silent.
Say it,
Jake bellowed, and I nearly jumped. His voice was so loud that my ears rang. Eric winced at Jake's demand, but whimpered Prettium's name all the same.
Again, guide him home.
Prettium! The air seemed to shift, the clouds growing darker. I wasn't an expert on dark magic or evil rituals, but that didn't seem like an especially positive sign. I was running out of time. Either I moved or I lost Eric forever. Fuck! Jake grunted, and the sound of shifting stones filled the night. He adjusted his position while holding a hand to his side over a blood-matted strip of fur, most likely one of the places Dad had shot him. So, I thought, regular punishment couldn't kill him, but it definitely still hurt him. He groaned, leaning back, and the stones began tumbling down the shore, clacking into the river with dull splashes. Now, I slipped forward, my footsteps in concert with his movements, using their sounds to mask my own. Yes, this could work. Another stretch from Jake and another step from me. But then he stopped moving. Comfortable at long last. The stupid ape. Shit. But then he stopped moving. Comfortable at long last. The stupid ape. Shit. I was left standing in the middle of the stone shore, halfway between the tree line and Jake. If I risked moving again, there was a good chance he'd hear me, and then that'd be it. Game over. But if I didn't...
Almost there, Eric,
Jake said, looking up at the darkening sky.
Keep speaking his name. Guide him and you'll be rewarded for it.
He chuckled.
You'll be the body of a god.
Eric did, his voice sounding broken, fragile and scared. Prettium, he said. His shoulders quaked with silent sobs. Prettium! Prettium!
Louder!
Jake screamed. He beat the ground with one of his massive fists.
He needs to hear you from beyond the veil, don't he? Shit, I can hardly hear you from over here.
That answered one question. Jake's hearing and mine weren't so different at all. That was good. I just hoped my head-to-toe mud bath would be enough to hide my scent from him.
I ain't gonna remind you again, boy. Say his fucking name and be loud about it.
Eric whimpered and I felt horrible, but I needed him to speak louder too. I needed his voice now more than ever. Prettium, he said. Prettium! Good. With each of his shouts I stole another meter of space, and soon I was close enough that I smelled the rot and decay of Grandma's corpse. Another 2 steps and I smelled the matted blood on Jake's fur. And being so close to him with such a clear view made me appreciate what a monster he truly was. I shifted the dagger in my grip, swallowing as I tried my best to determine just how I was going to plunge this thing into his heart. Where was his heart, anyway? His torso was massive. It seemed liable to be swimming around anywhere in there. Wait, I thought. What if I didn't aim for the heart at all? Nolan had cautioned that Jake wouldn't be put down by a few slashes of silver, but maybe I could get the dagger somewhere else to slow him down. His neck, or his spine. If I could hurt him enough that he couldn't hurt me back, I could finish him through the heart. It was a long shot, but then it was my only shot. Eric shouted Predium's name again and I crept forward. One step, then another, each footfall guarded by my brother's voice, echoing across the water and over the trees and apparently into an entirely different dimension. I made a mental note to avoid mentioning any of this to my therapist if I survived. She already thought I was crazy enough. A moment later, I took the final step, coming up directly behind Jake. His matted, brown fur was short and reeked of blood. Even sitting down, he was nearly 2 feet taller than I. I wouldn't be able to reach his neck, not reliably, but I could sever his spine. Something moved in my periphery and I glanced. Eric had turned around and he was facing Jake now, facing me. Shit, no time. I raised the dagger and plunged it forward, but that moment had been enough. Jake was already moving, even as the dagger raced towards his spinal column. The dagger sank into his flesh and he let out a shriek of pain. His wound sparked and sizzled as he stumbled forward, writhing in agony. He was moving though, which meant I had missed his spine. Not good. I dashed forward, knowing I had a window the size of an ant to get this right. I tore the dagger from his back and raised it up, and Jake's arm caught me in the side. I let out a wheeze of surprise as my body flew backwards, landed on the stone shore with a painful crunch, and the goggles rolling off of my head.
You!
Jake bellowed, rising from the rocks. Fresh blood wound its way from his lower back down the fur on his legs, and his mouth snarled. It was horrible, jagged and broken teeth dripping saliva.
You can't help yourself, can you, Matty?
Each of his words came out at a small roar, while his entire body trembled with anger or pain.
You're a real pain in my ass, and I don't think I care anymore. I think I'm gonna kill you.
He took a step towards me, and it felt like the whole of the shoreline shook.
Sorry, Ma,
he said, glancing at Grandma's cadaver.
It's him or Predium, and I ain't got a choice.
I scrambled backwards, beach stones slipping beneath my hands and feet. I knew I needed to stand up, needed to run, needed to do anything, but my body was in agony. Jake hadn't held back with that last smack, and it was all I could do to gasp breaths from my panicked lungs. And then I realized how fucked I really was. I'd lost the dagger. Shit. I scanned the area frantically, looking up and down the shore. I must have dropped it when Jake pulverized my ribs. Where was it? There. My heart sank. It was next to a fallen tree, some 30 feet away, and Jake was closing. It was far, much too far. I didn't have a choice though. I lurched to my feet, ignoring the slicing pain tearing across my body, and then I dashed. Each footstep shot daggers through me, but I gritted my teeth and ran in spite of it. Jake was faster. He leapt, his massive body crashing onto the stone shore in front of me. His hands clenched into fists.
Too long,
he growled.
Have I let you get away with your disrespect?
I stepped backwards, my will to fight evaporating. Jake was hurt, sure, but I was damn near dying. I wheezed another breath, tasting blood in my mouth, and dropped to a knee. The only shot I had at stopping this was on the other side of a were-Sasquatch, and I could barely move. It was over. Damn it. Something warm slipped down my cheeks, and I realized I was crying. I fell to my hands and knees, the tears vanishing on the already wet stones. Damn you, you asshole! And Jake's shadow draped across me.
Damn me!
He kicked at me, and I tumbled, my body rolling over the stones and further from the dagger. I slid to a stop on my back, spitting out a mouthful of blood, and gazing up at the sky. It had grown so dark. "Jake," I said. It hurt to even speak, but I needed to, and with everything I had, I sat myself upright. "Let me go instead of Eric. Let me be the host, like Grandma wanted." It was all I had left. I couldn't fight him anymore. I couldn't stop this, but maybe I could still save Eric.
"You don't deserve it,"
Jake said, and he stepped towards me, his demeanor different now, more resolved. It didn't matter what Grandma had wanted, he was finally going to kill me. And so be it. I'd given everything I had, and honestly, I was in so much pain that dying seemed easy now. Still, I looked to Eric. I wanted him to know how sorry I was for all of this. I wanted him to know that no matter what, he was still my brother, and I loved him. Eric was looking back at me, unmoving, silent, and smiling. "What?" I blinked. His eyes looked different, narrower. His face had lost the anxious framing from earlier, and now he looked calm, collected. "Eric?" I rasped.
"I let you live because you were family, Matty,"
Jake said, and I became aware that he was standing beside me now. "Eric!" I said more loudly. Jake gripped me by the hair and lifted me from the stones.
"I figured this family deserved to see the world we were making. Figured we were owed it. But my patience, it's shot."
His other hand grabbed my arm and squeezed. The pain was unbearable. I screamed, louder and harder than I ever had screamed in my life. It felt like my muscles, my tendons and my bones were being ground to dust. He lifted me to his gaping jaws, pressing them against the side of my head.
"I'm gonna rip you apart,"
he whispered.
"Limb from limb."
And trees shifted in the distance.
"And what's more,"
Jake continued, his canine slick with saliva, sliding against my face with every word,
"I'm gonna really have a good time of it."
and something rumbled in the woods, and Jake paused, sniffing at the air. I hung limp by my hair, rotating slowly before him. The rumbling grew deeper, faster, like a rock slide thundering towards us, and Jake tossed me to the ground, and I groaned, my body seizing up in pain. I was faintly aware of something sharp digging into me, but I didn't have the energy or will to care anymore.
"Fuck,"
Jake said. The trees parted, and something massive burst out of them, something angry. My grandma died and passed down her cabin to my brother and me. I finally remember what happened 12 years ago, and I wish I could forget it all over again. Let's get straight into that. The great creature crashed down onto the shore and the ground trembled. Its eyes were a wild purple and its skull was pointed and with a thick jutting brow. The beast lowered one of its massive arms to the ground, breathing furiously, each exhale marked by a plume of steam in the chilly night. Jake left me, slowly circling the newcomer. He sniffed at the air like a dog in a butcher shop, his simian hands flexing in and out of fists.
"Didn't think you'd take so well to the serum."
The serum. Was that thing my dad? If it was, it looked nothing like him now. It stood at least 15 feet tall, towering over Jake by 2 or 3 heads. Its skin was a mottled grey, and 2 fangs grew upward from its lower jaw. A trail of tangled, thick hair fell over its naked shoulders. It looked like a mountain troll.
"Or is it even you in there?"
Jake continued, chuckling.
"Maybe you smelled the blood of an Englishman and came running on over."
The troll let out a deafening screech, its voice like nails on a chalkboard, turned up to 20. It dashed at Jake, but Jake was faster. His ape-like body gave him the agility that the creature couldn't match, and he clambered up the thing's backside, wrapping his thick arms around its neck.
Now I know where Matty gets his temper from,
Jake grunted, squeezing his chokehold tighter. His dear old dad. The troll bucked and hollered, its short legs kicking up stones in every direction as it lashed about, attempting to reach Jack and toss him off. Fuck, so that thing was Dad. Worse yet, Jake had him in a bad position. He lacked Jake's flexibility and apparently his capacity for human thought. Whatever self-awareness Jake and Nolan had learned over the years was missing from my father. He was near mindless, thrashing about like a rabid animal. He looked feral. Jake was distracted though. The dagger gleamed in the corner of my vision, framed by the last dying rays of moonlight. If I could reach it, maybe I could catch Jake unaware and hurt him enough for Dad to get the upper hand. Once Dad had knocked him around some, I could stake the bastard and put an end to this summoning bullshit. I pressed down with my good arm, trying to use it to leverage myself upright, but the pain was unbearable. I collapsed back onto the beach, battered and broken. It was no use. I was just some guy trying to fight literal monsters, and I'd paid the price. But I wasn't alone. Eric! I called, craning my neck to look at him. He hadn't moved. On the contrary, he looked to have settled in. His eyes danced in the moonlight, and the faintest hint of a smirk played at the corners of his mouth. Eric! I shouted again. In the background, the sounds of our father's voice grew quieter, more laboured. Jake's chokehold might not be able to kill him, but we'd seen with the shotgun blasts that enough punishment could slow the cryptids down. Eric, look at me, for God's sake! Eric did, but it didn't seem like my brother. He looked identical to him, but his eyes were cold, dead. His anxious fidgeting had been replaced by a calm indifference. What is it, Matt? He said. The tone was all wrong. Damn it. Had the summoning finished? If it had, it lacked the climatic flair old horror movies had, promise me. That's Dad, I said, looking sidelong at a wheezing troll. He needs our help. My brother walked towards me with an uncharacteristic swagger, his messy black hair swept up in the breeze. Why don't you help him then? I'm a little hurt, I spat, gritting my teeth. In case you couldn't tell. Eric drew up in front of me, his skin sallower, paler than I remembered. His eyes flickered with hints of gold. We spent several long moments staring at each other, my heart beating out of my chest. He looked perfectly comfortable though, amused even. When he spoke, it was a word I didn't understand, something from another language. Die, rule. The world began to melt away. The sounds of Jake and Dad retreated into the background, the scents and sensations around me fading until I was surrounded by only an encroaching, suffocating darkness. What was happening? Was I dying? My mother's voice echoed all around me. Please, Matthew, she wept. Please. I could see her now, her figure coming to life through the black of my memories. She wore her favourite summer dress, dotted with bright sunflowers, and on her head, a wicker gardening hat. She smiled at me. Mom? I said, my voice stronger than it had been earlier. I felt whole again here, in the depths of my memories. She brought a finger to her mouth. Shh. Eric's coming. We don't want to ruin the surprise, do we? I blinked, staring at her. I'd almost forgotten the shine of her dark hair, the playfulness in her eyes, the kindness in her smile. She was such a nice memory. Why had I avoided it for so long? The light that framed her spilled out, illuminating the hardwood floor we stood upon, and then the walls with their dull, baby blue wallpaper, and finally the ceiling, where an old fan spun lazily, calling us from the summer sun. We were in a room I shared with Eric. In each corner were our 2 beds, dressed in bright Power Ranger blankets. The floor was covered in action figures and unfinished rounds of board games. When the memories shifted, Eric was with us in the room now, small and young, just as I was. We must have been 9 or 10. He didn't look happy though. He was throwing toys about, stomping around the room and screaming at Mum. "I don't care about my birthday. I just don't want to hear him anymore. I want the voice to leave me alone." The voice? The bedroom began to twist, spin out of focus. I was back in the unending darkness, that blank void where my memories lived. "She wants this to be her last dose," Grandma said. She sounded hazy, dreamlike. Her words drifted in from somewhere in the unending abyss. "She'll have one last swim and then she wants it stopped. For all of them." "She's a coward," Jake shouted. The memory began to build again and I was in the outhouse. Their voices were right outside of it. "Eric has all the potential and she's jealous of him." "Matthew," Grandma said. "Not Eric. Matthew is the one best suited. He's less affected by the serum." "But that's exactly why it needs to be Eric," Jake argued. "We want somebody powerful, somebody willing to do what needs to be done." "Hush! Keep your voice down. The boys might hear." Relax, Ma," Jake said with a sigh. "They're swimming in the river, and Nolan's keeping an eye on them." I heard him pacing. "Eric's potential is enormous, and we should be leveraging that." "He's not himself on the serum," Grandma snapped. "And by the way, Alice suspects you've been dosing him." "I've assured her that I've forbidden it, but I am beginning to think that you're not listening to me either." Jake kicked something, a bucket or a large can. "Come on, you know Alice doesn't believe in this anymore. She's killing herself fighting that damn serum. You've seen her. She looks half dead." "It's her choice to make," Grandma said. "I'll remind you that she's watching the boys from the water. I wouldn't try anything if I were you." Jake laughed. "She's my little sister. I'd be warning her not to try anything." The memory lurched again, this time taking us back to the mountain. Except it was a bright day and Mum, Eric and I were on the river, sitting up on a big rock where he read mysteries. Mum looked more unhappy than she had earlier. Her eyes were framed by dark bags and her posture was slouched, exhausted. She smiled in spite of it though, and I smiled back, so happy to be with her again, so happy to feel like a family again. "If we catch a fish, can I kill it?" Eric said. The comment caught me off guard. Eric was staring blankly into the water, his skin paler than before. He kept scratching at the back of his neck and I saw marks there. Some were scabbed over. "I call it, Matt. I get to kill it." "Don't you worry so much about that," Mum said calmly. I tried to speak too, but the words weren't there. I was an accessory to this, it seemed, and nothing more. Still, it was nice to be back here, before things had turned so bad, before that night that had ruined everything. "Try to enjoy the water," Mum added. "It's a beautiful day." "I hate the sun," Eric spat, bitterness creeping into his voice. "I want to see the cave again." Mum shifted, looking uncomfortable. "Grandma told you we can't go there, sweetheart." He glared at her. "Uncle Jake took me there. I know where it is." My mouth opened. Words came out, but they weren't mine. They were words I had said years ago. "Come on, Eric. Jake's letting us borrow his fishing gear and it's a freaking nice day. Who cares about a stupid cave?" He didn't so much as glance at me, just stared back over the water, silent. My vision blurred and the memory swept me away again. This time the change was subtle, and it couldn't have been more than a few hours later. The sun was setting now, painting the blue sky in shades of orange and red. I was reeling in a fish. Why did this feel so familiar? It gave me a horrible feeling, and I couldn't place why. "Mom!" I shouted. "I think it's a big one." "Great job, Matty. Uncle Jake will be really impressed." She beamed at me, and I felt my heart melt. "Just in time for dinner too," she added with a wink. I loved her so much, missed her so much. I'd forgotten how moody Eric could be, but that didn't matter. Not really. Kids were like that after all, and we were a family here, a real one. I finished reeling in the fish and pulled the hook from its mouth. The trout flopped and squirmed on a rock, desperate to return to the river. My young stomach twisted, realizing this was the part where we had to kill it. I had never killed anything bigger than a bug. "Can I do it?" Eric said, doing a poor job of masking his excitement. He eyed the fish hungrily. Mum looked tired, exhausted. "Maddie caught it. I think he should..." "That's okay," I said. I honestly didn't think I had it in me to kill this thing. "You do it." I tossed the fish to Eric gladly, and he held it on the rock. "I think it's easier with a knife," Eric said. "Jake always uses a knife when he kills his fish." He looked at our mother expectantly, his eyes drifting to the tackle box at her side. She hesitated, but opened the latches on the tackle box and pulled out Jake's garden knife. She passed it to Eric, handle first. He took it eagerly and gazed at it reverently before stabbing it down through the fish's head. It wriggled and he hacked at it again and again. And then he cut into it, carving at it on the rock. Guts spilled out and blood coated his fingers. "Stop!" I shouted. "You're ruining it." He looked up and I felt uneasy. Those eyes, that panting excitement on my brother's face. I was beginning to remember this moment and I wanted to leave. The sun inched behind the tree line, casting a shadow over the rock and over us. "Shut up, Matt," Eric growled. "That's enough, Eric," Mum said. Nervousness had slipped into her tone. She held out her hand. "You've killed it. Now let's put away the knife." Eric looked down at the blade, dripping with blood, coated in what remained of the fish. He blinked, and then stared up at our mother. There was something wrong with the way he looked at her. It was the same way he gazed at the fish. "No," he said. "I want to keep the knife." "Just give it to her, you dick," I snapped. I was angry at him for ruining the fish and our dinner. Young me had been so proud to catch it, so proud of the chance to show it to Uncle Jake that I was practically fuming over Eric's treatment of it. I was too young to notice the danger in the situation, in Eric's expression. I wanted to look away, but the memory dictated that I stare at him, furious, frustrated, 11 years old and completely oblivious to the subtext of the moment. Dread began mounting inside of me, but I had no way to communicate that to the younger me, to my mother. The truth was, I realized why this moment felt so wrong and so familiar. It was 12 years ago, moments before nightfall. "The knife, Eric," Mum said more forcefully. She nodded towards her open hand. "Now, please." "I already told you, I'm keeping it," Eric screamed. He pulled back, clutching a knife to his chest. Tears streamed from his eyes. "He wants me to have it and he'll hurt me if I give it back." "Now," Mother said, raising her voice. Her patience had run its course and she reached for it. Eric slashed at her and she recoiled in a spray of blood, cradling her hand to her stomach with a shriek. Life froze, my young heart thundering in my chest. No, there was no way. This couldn't have happened. It was a lie, all of it. Our mother had died in a river boating accident. I knew that. Eric knew that. Pre-Dion was doing this, affecting my memories.
Strangely, Eric, I didn't think it'd take any convincing for you at all. Or are you still pretending you didn't murder my sister?
The memory kept playing. I couldn't stop it. I couldn't affect anything here. I couldn't even look away. I was at the mercy of its history. Eric rose and Mum tried to as well, but he caught her across the face with the knife. More blood, so much blood. She stumbled backwards, falling with an anguished moan to the rock. "Please, Matthew," she wept. "Please." Her voice broke my paralysis, and the younger me launched at them, my fear and shock replaced by adrenaline. Eric slammed the knife into her, and I kicked him as hard as I could, square in the face. He flew off of her. His body slid down the big rock and fell to the beach with a groan. My chest felt tight with panic, with terror. I turned to Mum and saw the knife sitting down to its hilt in her chest. Blood pooled over her white sunflower dress, turning it a horrible crimson. Tears spilled out of my eyes and I screamed for help. I screamed for Jake, for Grandma. What did I know? I was just a kid. "Mum," I whimpered. "Mum?" She didn't respond. Her eyes were blank, her body still. The grey of the rock had been replaced by a slick coating of red. Barking sounded in the distance. Griff. Something struck me in the back of my skull when I dropped next to Mum. My head throbbed and my vision blurred. Beside me, there was a wet sound and I realized the knife was being pulled from Mum's chest. I rolled over, disorientated and scared and running entirely on instinct now. And Eric stood above me. He slashed at me, and I threw up my hand to protect my face. Blood sprayed across my t-shirt and I screamed. He swung the blade again, cutting at me over and over. And finally, with his other hand, he grabbed my arm and pressed it down, out of his way. And then he was on top of me. The knife to my throat, and I too was terrified, in too much pain to move or react. His eyes glinted with a hint of gold. "No, that's too quick," Eric hissed. He adjusted himself, moving a blade away from my throat. Agony tore through me. The knife stabbed into my side, slowly sliding deeper and deeper. My will to fight began to fade. I could feel the younger me giving in, giving up. My brother was killing me. I watched the memory play out in horror. That wasn't Eric. It wasn't the man I knew. Something terrible had happened to him. Griff's barking grew louder, and I heard Grandma shouting. Eric looked up, his face losing a manic terror. The next moment, Jake pulled him off of me, and Eric kicked and screamed and shouted. His voice turned to mumbles, slurring, before going completely silent. "He's killed them!" Grandma shrieked. Inside of my younger body, I felt my heartbeat slowing. My skin grew cold. It was all I could do to keep my eyelids open, for fear that I shut them and might never open them again. Things were dimming, getting murkier by the second. Somebody appeared over the top of me, holding my eyes open and staring into them. "Maddie's still alive, but he's hurt bad." It was Jake. "We can save him with a dose." Grandma's whispers turned to sobbing howls. "My Alice!" "Ma!" Jake shouted. "The serum, hand it to me or your grandson dies." I couldn't see Grandma from my position, but she must have agreed silently, because Jake was leaning over me again, and this time with a satchel draped across his shoulder. He reached into the bag and pulled something out, and then I felt a thin sharpness pierce my forearm. "And Alice?" Jake said, looking over to where my mum's body lay. "I don't think a dose of this is going to make a difference for her." Grandma shuffled into frame. She looked panicked. Her eyes were wide and her frame, normally strong for her age, shook with horror. "We'll have to give her more than..." "What if it's not enough?" Jake said, rising from me. My vision was distorted, hardly there at all, but I could make out an empty syringe in his hand. He stuffed the syringe into the satchel bag. "What if she dies anyway? How are we going to explain that?" A pause. "We'll have to throw her in the river, downstream, somewhere we can lose her body." "Fair enough," Jake said. "We can't have the authorities poking around up here." "I need to make sure the boys don't remember a thing. This was a river boating accident, nothing more. You hear me, Jacob? Poor Maddie's hand got cut up by the propeller when the boat toppled over." Grandma nodded to herself, running a hand through her short curls of grey hair. "That's it. We'll scuttle your fishing boat and tell the sheriff it was an accident. Nothing more." "Well, let's hope she survives then," Jake said with a grim chuckle. "I love that boat." My vision faded to black and then slowly, gradually, sounds returned. The high-pitched screeches of my father being choked by Jake. The words of Eric, or the monster wearing his skin, still standing before me.
"You see now? This was all him, all along,"
Eric said. He leaned down and opened my jacket with a look of fascination. "Jake did all of this. A good effort, but unfocused. Messy." He gently put a hand near my stomach. "Ah, and there you go. I suspected as much, given your glassy expression. You've already done it." I looked down, following his gaze to my open jacket. Shit. The syringe I pocketed earlier was sticking out of my side, still halfway full of swirling emerald serum. Its cap must have fallen off when Jake tossed me around. "I'll let you in on a little secret, Matthew," Eric said, leaning down to whisper in my ear. "It's finished. Eric's gone. I've crossed from beyond the veil, and now there's no turning back." I wanted to scream, to cry, but it was too much. I was too weak, too hurt. Pre Dion brought a cold hand to the side of my head and tilted it so that I was staring at Jake and Dad. Their fighting had escalated and Dad was losing, badly. Jake's Sasquatch arms still squeezed his throat, but now he had bit into him as well. His long, jagged canines pierced his neck, and blood leaked from my dad by the gallon, drenching the shore beneath. "Your father is weakening," Pre Dion said. "Once your uncle's weakened him enough, he'll kill him." "He can't touch the dagger," I said. My words were slurred now. Was that because of the serum? "It's silver." Pre Dion chuckled, standing up and dusting Eric's jeans off. "You caught on to this pretty well. Alas, no need for the silver. Not when your uncle can merely rip his heart free and be done with it." I didn't feel well. I felt nauseous, dazed. It was hard to think, like each thought was moving through molasses. "You can't stop it, Matthew." Pretty words seemed distant, difficult to make out. "Join me, and we can stop it together." Another screech and Dad's body crashed to the ground, shaking the shoreline and causing a small rock slide of pebbles into the river. Splash, splash. I wanted to rest, close my eyes and go to sleep forever. I wasn't afraid anymore. I was ready. Another screech, weaker this time. Dad was hurt and he needed me. I had lost everybody. Mum, Eric, Grandma. Dad was all I had left and I was letting him down all over again. I didn't have a choice. If Predion was already here, then it didn't matter whether or not I became a monster. Not anymore. The war was lost. But I could still win this battle. I could still kill Jake and still save my father. I found the syringe in my stomach and pressed down on the plunger. My grandma died and pass down her cabin to my brother and me. I've run out of options. I've taken a final dose of serum. I'm changing into something horrible. Let's get straight into that. Adrenaline rioted through me. Each breath felt like fire in my lungs, and each movement sending pins and needles shooting through my nervous system. My eyes bulged as pressure built in my skull, and I felt thirsty, so thirsty that my mouth was parched and my tongue was fat. But I wasn't thirsty for water. I wanted blood. I needed it. My bones snapped and twisted, piercing my skin at points while I choked on my teeth as they fell free from my gums. I let out an anguished scream as my spine elongated, popping and cracking as it snaked its way further and further up my growing torso. I clenched my fists, willing myself to bear this pain. Was this what Dad had gone through? Mum? My neck cranked, snapping in all wrong directions. Fuck! I had never been in such agony. It was like my entire body was being torn apart and reassembled from the inside out. My consciousness flickered, but my grounding exercises kept me awake. That and Dad. I had to save him, even if it killed me. I had to, because he was the only person left to save, and I couldn't bear to let another person down. Lucky for me, saving him meant killing Jake. I blinked and my eyelids felt slick, wet and heavy. My vision was no longer the dim, shadowy thing from moments ago. Rather now, it was a mess of colours, an abstract painting of madness and instinct. A shotgun blast rang out and I staggered to my feet, searching for the source. Nobody else was here though. It was still just Prediom, my father, and Jake. No shotguns, no firearms. I shook my head, feeling dazed and disorientated. Another blast sounded and another. I realized they were coming from right beneath me, and I looked down, catching sight of my fingernails fall into the stone shore. They dropped in slow motion, like leaves drifting down from the trees, or something descending through water. One struck the ground and I recoiled. Its gentle collision created another ear-splitting blast of sound. I became aware of my ears tugging upwards, growing on the side of my head. A cacophony of noise began erupting around me, each sound amplified by a factor of thousands, each bringing new agony to my senses. I could hear everything distinctly, too distinctly. My father's heartbeat, slow and laboured, drummed like a death march, while Prediom's laughter echoed like bats screaming in a cave. I was consumed by sound, pain, and terror.
"Look at that,"
Jake's voice said, loud as a jet engine.
"Your son's finally decided to come around."
I heard the muscles in Jake's arms contract, followed by the chorus of my father's desperate wheezes. More blood thundering on the shore. Could I hear Jake smiling? I needed to get over there. I stepped towards them and stumbled, my legs numb and unresponsive. Damn it! Clearly my body was still working its way through the transformation. It was all I could do to stand on my fast-growing legs and not keel over. I growled, staring at Jake. My entire being felt magnetized towards him. I was desperate to sink my teeth into him, to pay him back 100 times for all of the horror he had caused my family. Soon, I promised. Soon. My breath quickened in anticipation, but each gulp of air felt different, smoother, easier. Where before my exhales would steam in the chilly night, now there was nothing. The air inside of me was frigid cold. I was leveling out now, adjusting to the serum. The ungodly pain that had been omnipresent before was slowly tapering off, and I realized the transformation must be nearly finished. I looked down, gazing at my new body beneath the leather jacket and torn t-shirt. I was lean, but I felt stronger than I ever believed I could be, stronger than I'd ever believed anything could be. Yes, I could do it now. I could end Jake. I could drink his blood and wash away this horrible thirst. I licked my lips and found my tongue much longer than before, serpentine and forked.
Welcome to the family, Matty,
Jake shouted.
Why don't you come on down and convince your dad to see some light or reason?
Dad. I flexed my hands and realized they too were different now. My fingers were long and thin, playing host to a set of horribly sharp claws. Good. Those will come in handy. I won't lie to you, Matty, Prudhomme said. I'm impressed, but unsurprised. I looked at him, willing myself to speak, but only managing guttural grunts and snarls. He chuckled, placing his hands on his hips. Still learning, aren't you? His eyes shifted to Jake, who was still perched atop of my father, chewing into his neck and drenching the shore in blood. It took Jacob years to master sentience, and longer still to truly control his true form. I shouted at him to stop this, to let my brother go, but it materialized as an ear-splitting roar, and nothing more. You're adjusting incredibly well. Prudhomme circled me, his gold-flecked eyes drifting up and down my person, his lips in near constant state of grin. Your father is nearly as brutish as he was as a man, but you? He twitched, his head snapping to the side with a choking cough. A moment later, he ran a gentle hand over his neck and smiled. Sorry, still getting used to my new suit. Looks like we're both acquainting ourselves to these new forms, aren't we? I heard his words and I understood them, but I couldn't respond. Why not?
What?
I managed to say, though. The words came out twisted, broken, and strange. Prudhomme's eyes lit up. Aha! There it is. A new record, I should think. He pulled out Eric's phone and looked at it before shrugging and tossing it into the river with a splash. Dead battery. Can't say the time for certain, but your arrival at speech is certainly impressive, nonetheless.
What?
I said again, pushing the word out more naturally now. I tried to say the next piece, but only managed to choke and growl. Easy does it, Matthew, Prudhomme coached. Try again, this time without the emotion. It's often such a stumbling block. Fucking hell. Alright, once more.
What am I?
The words were harsh and their pronunciation unnatural, but they were there. Prudhomme clapped his hands enthusiastically. Ho ho ho, well done! I always knew you were to be apex, but to achieve this level of mastery so quickly, you're a true prodigy. I would have been happy to have you serve as my vessel.
What?
I repeated, and this time the anger seeped into my words.
Am I?
Right, Prudhomme said, bringing a hand to his chin and appraising me thoughtfully. Well, you're certainly quite tall. Those fangs, though. His playful smile vanished, replaced by a piercing smirk. I would say you resemble a vampire, one of the old ones.
Old ones?
Dad's voice rang out and I realized I didn't care anymore. I stepped towards Jake, my legs feeling stronger and more balanced now. Yes, it was high time to finish this. I flexed my claws and let out a screech before springing forward, ready to end the bastard's existence. Prudhomme grabbed my heel midair and flung me backwards onto the shore, and I crashed in a shower of stone pebbles. Yes, Prudhomme said, standing in front of me and examining Eric's nails nonchalantly. The old ones were those who existed before the madness of man, before people wiped them from existence. They are the firstborn of this world. I staggered back to my feet. All right, so Prudhomme was powerful and fast, faster than I was. I looked back to Jake and my father, hating that, even as I was now, There was still this wall between us, the dipshit beyond the veil. Still, Jake wasn't killing him. He needs to pull his heart for that, and he seemed more interested in simply keeping him out of play. "Matthew," Pretium said. I heard a hint of annoyance in his voice. "Are you ignoring me?" Fine, I'll indulge the parasite for now.
No.
Such a relief.
What is the firstborn?
Excuse me, I forget myself. Context is everything, isn't it? You see, I'm not the villain you've painted me as. And yes, I see the glint in your eyes, the anger, the desperation, the fear. I assure you, though, that I am no more your enemy than the breath in your lungs. He spoke so casually, it was hard to imagine he was the source of all of this horror. He carried himself like a chartered accountant. "Eons ago," Pretium said, "before man began its slow descent into unfiltered madness, destruction and war, there was a balance, a calmness in the universe. I once walked this world, you know. I drank in its beauty every day and I bathed in its wonder." He did a small pirouette, breathing deep. "It was truly a gem of the universe. Of any universe, it was heaven."
How much more stories?
I growled, my body lurching forward on its own accord. Fuck, my mouth felt thirsty, so dry. I needed to drink something. Jake's blood would do. Yes, it would do just fine. I stepped towards him again and Pretium hopped in front of me. "Sorry," he said, giving an awkward laugh. "I'm almost finished, and then you can do as you please. As I said, context is important, Matthew." My body was desperate for blood. My muscles twitched and spasmed, eyeing Jake. I bottled it though, pushed it all the way down and put a cork on it. Just a little longer, I told myself. Sooner or later, this cosmic arsehole would finish his monologue, and then I could eviscerate my uncle. Pretium folded his arms, noticing my distraction. "The truth is, you humans have ruined everything, haven't you? You've spread across the world, erecting still monuments of greed and slavery, murdering the planet with every step that you take." His face, my brother's face, fell into a snarl. "You've drained this world of its minerals, its oils, its very lifeblood. You cast a shadow of poison across it, filling it with waste and fallout. You think yourself gods, but you treat each other as ants." He took another breath and shook as he did so. He was furious and growing angrier with each word. His gold eyes began swirling, glowing and brimming with an impossible depth. "You've murdered the old ones, centuries ago, of course, but with wanton cruelty." The words fell from his mouth like a guillotine. "You've wiped them from human memory, leaving them only as myths and legends. Stories lost to time, foolish to believe because they were only ever fictitious."
Who are you?
I said, surprised to find my voice sounding much more level now. "I am a means to an end, Matthew. I am the universe redeeming itself. I am the pride of this world, come to exorcise the cancer that is man." My father let out a cry and his massive head dropped to the shore. He gave another swing of his arm, though it was weak now, half-hearted.
"Matty,"
Jake called.
"I'm serious. Get over here and tell your old man to settle down before I actually kill the fucking prick."
My vision exploded into watercolor of red. I couldn't control myself anymore.
"Jake!"
I screamed, launching over Pretium. The force of my jump was more than I imagined, and I cleared the gap by wider than I intended. I landed on the far shore, with Jake and my father now between Pretium and I. Jake, still eyeless, turned his head to face me as the sound of my body landing on the stones reached him. But he was moving slowly, so slowly. I might not be as fast as Predium, but I was faster than Jake. I bounded across the stones, my body long and lanky, but with each step I grew more familiar with it, until eventually I dropped onto all fours and galloped towards my uncle, letting loose a feral screech. He hardly had the time to paint his ape face with terror before I was on him, my claws slicing into his sides. He raised an arm to bash me, but I dodged it easily. In this form, he moved so slowly, it was like killing a snail. I cut into him, over and over. Instinct overtook me, and I understood what I needed to do. I understood what I needed to destroy. This tendon, that nerve cluster. Moments later, I landed back on the stones, breathing heavy, my long claws wet and red. The sound of fur drifting across fur met my ears, and Jake dropped from my father's backside, lying motionless on the shore.
You little fucker,
Jake gasped, gnashing his simian jaws.
I gave you this and you...
I stepped over to him, pressing one of my thin legs to his chest.
You gave me a living nightmare, Jake. You took my brother from me. You nearly stole my father.
The words were coming easily now. I was getting the hang of this serum.
You forced me to become a monster.
I leaned down, and the primal piece of me understood this fight was already finished. I cut his tendons a piece. He couldn't move anymore, not for a while, at least.
Worst of all.
My fangs were inches from Jake's mangled face.
You dosed my brother and stole my mom.
And I pressed my hand to his chest, my claws digging into his flesh.
Matty,
he spluttered, fear seeping into his tone.
Come on now. I did what needed to be done. You know that deep down. I mean, for fuck's sake, look behind you, kid. I brought the Lord back from beyond the veil. He can fix this world. Make it right again. Make it right,
I said, tasting his excuse.
That's it, Matty. He's gonna make it right, and yes, a few people had to get hurt, but your brother and we've done something incredible. You've done something unforgivable.
I tore into his neck with my fangs, drinking his blood, and my body shook with ecstasy. I had tasted better than anything, and I had waited so long.
My lord,
Jake said, voice weak, his head low to the side, gazing towards the monster in my brother's skin.
Please, please, I brought you.
Pointless. I already knew Predium wasn't going to save him. How could he? Everything he just admonished about humanity, Jake embodied. He was the poison. The demon in the shadows that stole the pride of this world and manipulated it for its own ends.
You thought,
I grunted, slurping the blood from his neck,
that you would be rewarded for your murder, your hate, and your sick bullshit.
I lifted my head from his neck, Jake's blood pouring from my mouth. I positioned my hand over his large chest, my ears picking up the rapid beating of his terrified heart.
You're not greater.
I thrust my hand through his ribs and gripped his thrumming heart. He let out a scream, one so violent that the birds exploded from their roosts, filling the night sky with wings and feathers. I leaned back down, my mouth inches from his ear.
I am.
My fist closed tight around his heart, crushing it like a peeled orange before pulling it free from his chest in a shower of blood. And I closed my eyes, feeling the softness of what remained of his heart in my hand. I felt the warmth of his blood on my body. I tasted it on my lips. The sound of clapping pulled me from my reverie. Predium strolled out in front of me, smiling enthusiastically. You actually get it, Matthew. You understand the madness of this world, don't you?
This isn't a solution,
I said, looking at my father. He was bleeding, but I could see the punchy wounds of Jake's jaws beginning to slowly heal. Whatever was in that serum truly was incredible. Horrifying, but incredible.
It's a death sentence for humanity.
Death sentence? Predium looked offended.
You want to turn everybody into this, don't you?
It's the only way to fix this heaven.
What? What sort of heaven is filled with monsters?
Predium shook his head, placing an impossibly cold hand on my arm. Monsters exist in the hearts of men, Matthew. Look at your uncle. Was his sin being a beast, or the horror that lived beneath the fur and fangs? The horror of his human aspiration? Jake was an arsehole, but a poor example.
There are lots of good people out there. They don't deserve this.
No, but they don't deserve to be subjugated either, do they? Slaves to a world that gives them pennies for their efforts, while their lords grow fat on their sweat and blood? He leaned close to me, his voice intoxicating. Men treat men like monsters, Matthew. The beasts of the world live by a code, and a simple one. They exist to survive and little else. They act as their instincts dictate, and even in their proliferation, they could never bring this planet to its knees. He clasped his hands behind his back and began circling me. Nuclear warfare will be the end of this world. I have seen it. The ash, the fire, the unimaginable pain. He looked to my grandmother's corpse, still propped up by the water. When that time comes, the dead will be the grateful few. You cannot imagine the horror that awaits your human race.
It's not your decision,
I snarled.
If we fuck things up, we fuck things up on our terms. Now let my brother go.
He paused, paying me a remorseful look. Eric's a power vessel, unstable but powerful. To give him up would be to relinquish a millennia of effort. He shook his head. No, I'm afraid I cannot. Many times throughout history, people have come close to summoning me, to opening the gateway between our worlds. They've made a couple of offerings perhaps, or 3, but never 4, and never with a host so capable. He flexed his hands and a nearby tree exploded in a shower of bark and leaves. I jumped back, stumbling off of Jake's corpse. I felt stronger than I'd ever dreamed, but that? What was this guy capable of? I swallowed, terror beginning to grip me as I realized the gulf between our abilities. What was that? Predium laughed. That was what I've been waiting for. He snapped his fingers and the sky flickered blue before returning to black of night. Eric's even stronger than you know. In this body, I can nearly touch the full extent of my power. I can almost wield the veil. His eye twitched. Barring some instances of insubordination. He gave his head an irritated shake, though those should come under control in due time. Point is, Matthew, I've waited far too long to give this up in the name of a single human being's emotional experience. He offered me a half smile. I apologize, truly, but it is for the good of us all. Good of us all? I've heard that bullshit before.
So, what? You're going to wipe us all out? Sayonara, humanity?
Not at all. I thought we covered this. I'm going to make everybody as you are, Matthew. Greater. I'm going to reroute this world from calamity and back towards simple beauty. I'll take the human mold and cast it into that of the old ones, into being free from human ambition and horror.
You might be surprised to hear that most people don't find werewolves and vampires to be free from horror.
Pritium smirked. Humanity always feared what it doesn't understand.
How's this then?
I growled.
Jake was every bit of a monster. He always was, old one or not, and your serum? That made my brother murder our mother.
That was an issue with your family's serum, I'm afraid. Pritium looked down, sighing. Regretful, of course, but ultimately necessary. To create a truly pure transformation within a human lifespan would be near impossible undertaken. He winked and the stones began to rise, floating around him. Luckily for me, I suffer no such limitations. In this body, I can recreate the old ones in their original image. I can free this world from the shackles of humanity and return it to a simple reality of instinct and survival.
You start turning people into monsters and they're gonna kill people.
Billions, if I'm lucky.
You're twisted.
I'm necessary. If you could see your world's future, you would grovel at my feet, Matthew. But you're too absorbed in your humanity to care. To you, the only thing that matters is... He patted his chest. Your brother and the rest of your family. You lack the perspective to see things on a scale so wide as I. And so, his end game was turning everybody into a monster in the name of stopping some future nuclear wasteland. I clenched my fists, my claws digging into my flesh. If that were true, it could almost justify it. Almost. But it meant removing the one thing we possessed, our free will. Well, there was a chance we didn't devolve into nuclear war, wasn't there? A chance we figured this shit out as human beings. I had to trust in that. It was all that I had left.
Let Eric go.
I snarled. I was done negotiating, done listening to his rationalizations. I wanted my brother back and I didn't care how powerful this dickhead was.
I'm not gonna let you turn this world into monsters.
And Pritium laughed. Too late. The world's already full of monsters. They just look like you, so you don't mind so much. I racked my mind for a way out of this. How was I supposed to force him out of Eric? I had no fucking clue. This was always Eric's area of expertise. The planning, the know-how. I hated myself for not reading more of the cave's books when I had a chance. Maybe there was some mention of a way to reverse the ritual. Yes, that was it. If Pritium had walked the earth before and been banished, then there was definitely a way to send him back. I just needed to figure out how. I think I'll go ahead and get started, Pritium said.
What?
He stepped into the river. No, he stepped onto it. He walked along the water to the center of the current. This is where I was chained, you know. A bit further upstream, but still. Oh, it's almost poetic that this should also be where I deliver this world's redemption. He took a deep breath and raised his arms, and the water drifted upwards, dancing around him. Sit tight, Matthew. Soon I'll show you that change is necessary as a part of our universe, and that some change is inevitable. Fuck. Right now? He was going to turn the world right now? Jesus. I looked around me, desperately hoping for some way to stop this, some way to end this, but I didn't have a library here. I didn't have any counterspells or ways of reversing the summoning ritual. I just had me, my comatose father, and the dagger. I swallowed, staring at the gleaming blade on the shore. It was silver, but its hilt wasn't. I could grab it, use it. Sarah through, Pritium said, his voice so loud that the very trees shifted. Barathranul Shri. I didn't know how long this spell would take, but I did know I was running out of time. I screamed into the night and bashed my fists into the stone shore. What was I supposed to do? What options did I even have anymore. And my mother's voice echoed in my mind. Matthew, please. My grandma died and passed down her cabin to my brother and me. Now, an interdimensional asshole is trying to end the world as we know it. Let's get straight into that.
Pretty young,
I shouted, hoping I could distract him. Maybe buy myself some time. Buy everybody some time.
Tell me about the old ones. Tell me about the veil.
Anasonalai Voltoro Yith. His voice was everywhere and it felt thick with power. The river water swirled about him now, a cascading spire of green and black. Sinara Paralu. Fucking hell. It was no use. Apparently he'd had his fill of waxing philosophical and lecturing me on all reasons human beings sucked. He was focused now, determined to finish his incarnation. Soon the whole world would turn into a breeding ground for monsters like Jake, and I'd be out of a family. Think, Matt. God damn it, think! The dagger. It was an option, but one I didn't want to use. I eyed it, resting upon the stones and gleaming in Pretium's light show. I could kill Jake and Nolan, but could it kill the bastard they were born to appease? I gripped my rows of teeth and stared up at the entity wearing Eric's skin. My brother didn't ask for this. He had never wanted to be dosed with that serum. He never wanted to become a vessel for the eldritch dipshit. He wanted to be an engineer, start a small family, and make video games in his spare time. And thinking about using the dagger on my little brother made me feel like crying. But in this form, I wasn't certain that I could. Instead, my body just swelled with frustration, and my muscles grew tight and swollen, building with energy. I could reach Pretium from here. I could jump the length of the river and get at him. My eyes swiveled to the dagger. I could drive it through his heart. As I was now, I knew my aim wouldn't be an issue. But it wasn't fair to Eric, and I doubted I could live knowing that I'd killed my own brother. Matthew, please. I shook the memory. Not now, Mum. Not now. You're in quite a predicament, aren't you, son? The voice was faint, difficult to make out, but it was there. Somebody had spoken to me. I swung my vision around. Dad was still unconscious on the shore, and Pretium was still bellowing his chant. Then who? No. I spun around to Jake and breathed a sigh of relief. He was every bit as dead as I had made him, which only left. My eyes shifted to Grandma. There was no way. I leapt and landed in front of her, showering her blackened corpse in an upkick of stones. She still looked dead enough, although I had been burned for thinking that twice tonight already. A memory tugged at my mind. Nolan had mentioned that it required 4 offerings to summon Pretium. Himself and Jake had counted for 2, and my dad would have been the 3rd. I figured that since the bastard actually did get summoned, that I must have counted for the 4th, even though Nolan suspected I didn't meet the criteria. After all, I might not have been a full cryptid at that point, but I did have multiple doses of the serum under my belt and was well on my way to becoming one. Even still, when I'd left Nolan, he was at death's door. Would he have counted? Or was there another monster out there? I stared at my grandma's rotting corpse, my enhanced sense of smell, really noticing how pungent she reeked. It made sense that she could be the 4th. I mean, who better than the woman who started it all? Grandma? I said, laying a gentle, blood-smeared set of claws on her shoulder.
Are you alive?
Lord help me if you're speaking to a dead woman. The voice again, but it wasn't coming from Grandma. In fact, it sounded more masculine on a second hearing. I wheeled around. Might be. We don't have much hope, after all.
Where are you?
I hissed.
Who are you?
I eyed Predium, relieved to see him still absorbed in his ritual. As a bonus, his voice echoed all around us, drowning out our conversation. "Up here, kid." I glanced upward. All I saw were trees and dark sky. Or maybe it was a bird. I felt thoroughly confused. Was I getting pranked in the middle of an apocalypse? A branch shifted, and then another. Leaves rustled, but strangely, only on a single tree. The one directly in front of me. "A little lower," said the voice. I moved my eyes down from the tops of the tree towards the thicker area of the trunk and... was that a face in the bark? Bingo! The face moved, or his mouth did. Did it think that the next time I saw you I'd be looking at... well, whatever it is that I'm looking at? I tried to place the voice, but I couldn't. It was definitely a man's, but entirely unfamiliar.
"Do I know you?"
And the tree shrugged, its branches dipping and rising like it had been struck with a stiff wind. Not so much. I suspect you know of me. But when you and I met, you weren't at an age to be remembering much of anything. I took a step towards the tree, glancing cautiously towards Predium. He was still distracted. Or perhaps more accurately, he couldn't care less what I was doing. To him, I was a speck. Insignificant, non-threatening. I stared at the face in the bark, and it looked like somebody I'd seen in an old photograph. Hang on.
"Grandpa?"
I wish I had a prize to give you, Matthew. The two small indentations that resembled eyes widened, and its carved mouth curved into a smile. I see Gale's little experiment is really taken off. I swallowed, looking back over the shore, taking in the carnage. Jake's corpse, slit open with his crushed heart lying unceremoniously on his chest. Grandma's rotting cadaver, complete with fungus growing upon her blackened face, and Dad's monstrous body, wheezing for breath in a pool of his own blood. And there, hanging in mid-air over the river, surrounded by swirling tongues of water, Eric, my brother, possessed by an entity from another dimension. Yeah, you could say that. I looked back to the tree, to my grandpa. You died when I was young.
"Did she do this to you?"
At my request, yes. Cancer, you know. Terrible disease, and I thought I could do with some more years of looking at this fine river. She placed my soul into the wood itself. His soul was a part of the wood? That sounded like insanity to me. How was something like that even possible? Mixing man and wolf DNA to make a werewolf seemed, at least in some regards, within the bounds of human science. But this? He must have read the confusion on my face. It's actually a simpler bit of magic than what's happened to you, if you're curious.
"I am,"
I said.
"but I don't have time to hear the details. How long have you been here?"
He sighed, his branches sloping downward. 2 decades. And to be honest with you, I spent most of them sleeping. So much for watching a river, eh? 3 in the Naz, Dru Aris, Predium bellowed. His voice was rising, bit by bit, growing into a crescendo. I didn't know a damn thing about spells, but I had a hunch more enthusiasm wasn't exactly a good thing.
"Grandpa, I need to know, is there anything I can do to stop this? You must have overheard Grandma mention the ritual or the offerings."
He chuckled. Overheard? I was the one who turned her onto it. Where do you think she got all of her books? I shook my head.
"What?"
I was an archaeologist in life, boy. Dug up those dusty old tombs during one of our excavations. It was a real pain getting them home, but after I read what was inside of them, there was no way I could leave them be. He paused, his eyes drifting up to look at Predium. Like I said, I've been asleep for past 2 decades. A good sleep, too, until that bastard blew apart one of my trees.
"That's Eric,"
I said.
"That bastard's taken over your grandson's body."
So I've gathered.
"I need a way to stop this, please."
I dropped to my knees, feeling hopeless.
"If I don't, then He's gonna turn the whole fucking world into monsters.
You watch your language, Matthew, Grandpa said with a sternness I could hardly believe given the circumstances. Still, I understand your dilemma, and to be honest with you, I never expected to reach this point. The rituals and spells listed in those books, well, they seemed a gateway to immortality, to having a shot at enjoying life beyond our normal lifespan.
That's not what it's turned into. Billions of people are gonna die, Grandpa. I need to stop this. I need to save Eric.
Then you'll need to burn Pretty Young's corpse. Great. Like I had that lying around.
I don't have that kind of time.
I snarled.
I need to do something now.
You can do it now, you nit, but you'll need to do it quickly. If he catches wind of you, it ain't gonna end well. The tree, Grandpa, shuddered. I should know. I've felt what he's capable of. Listen to me, and listen well, Matthew. Up the river, near Jake's fishing dock, is where Pretium's corpse was sealed. Happens to be why we brought this crappy old patch of land so many years ago.
Okay, Jake's dock.
Pretium's corpse is enclosed in a tomb, and that tomb acts as his gateway. If you can pull his corpse free, light it aflame, you can end this for good. Great. That actually didn't sound too terribly impossible by tonight's standards. I'm on it. Well, let's get a move on. I'm about 10 minutes away from my life's legacy being a damn apocalypse.
Right.
I nodded.
Thank you, Grandpa.
I tore across the shore. Jake's dock was about half a mile up the river, but it didn't take me more than a minute to reach. Once I had, I took one cursory glance back at Pretium, making sure he hadn't noticed me. Of course, he hadn't. Arrogant prick. He kept himself busy chanting, though. The sky had begun flickering with snaps of lightning, and the river's current had turned all wonky. It swelled in places and then reversed in other places. Whatever he was doing, it was affecting the planet itself.
Bottoms up.
I muttered and stepped off the dock, plunging into the black water. If I'd done this as a human, I'd have almost certainly been pulled away by the current and drowned. Maybe after bashing my head off a few rocks. Now though, I could fight the current, force myself deeper into the river. The inky black wasn't a problem for my eyes either. The underwater landscape was painted for me in brushstrokes of red and yellows, as vibrant as the cabin had been yesterday afternoon. Looking below me though, I noticed the river was a lot deeper than I'd thought. Even with my new eyes, I could barely make out the bottom. If I had to guess, I'd say it must have been close to 150 meters, maybe more. The thing was incredible. I treaded water, searching for what Grandpa had described. It took me a minute, but I caught sight of it. There, deep, so damn deep. It was near the center of the channel, and mostly buried by sediment and rock, but there was no doubt about it. That was a stone tomb, complete with the same creepy ruined carvings from the summoning circle. I swam towards it, the shifting current pulling me from to and fro. Once I reached the bottom, I positioned myself against a rock with my hands on the tomb's lid. I pushed with everything I had, and the thing barely moved. It must have been a couple of tons, way more than it looked. Maybe the effect of some kind of spell. Alright, change your plans. I crouched, leveraging the river's bottom to help me lift the lid. After some struggling, I managed to get the lid up, just enough that I could push it free from the tomb. It thudded to the ground with a low rumble, and that was the hard part done with. Now all that was left was snagging Pretium's corpse. I stared into the tomb, looking at the creature I couldn't comprehend. It resembled nothing I'd ever seen before, with its face all wrong and covered in ice. On either side of its head were two mouths, each lined with hundreds of teeth. Call me a hypocrite, but even as a lanky vampire, I thought that he looked pretty fucking gross. I lifted the freaky corpse from the tomb and pressed off of the river floor, towards the surface. Now, I just needed to light this thing on fire and call it a day. Something struck me hard. My jaw felt like it nearly come clean off my face. I recoiled, spinning through the water while I lost my grip on Predium's body. I shook off the daze and stared at the last person in the world I wanted to see down here. Eric. He opened his mouth to a flurry of bubbles, but that was fine because I could hear his voice in my mind anyway. Digging for treasure, Matthew? I merely indicated I had been chained upstream. Interesting for you to have found my corpse so readily. I gurgled and spirited "fuck you" in response. You're foolish to think that you can be rid of me so easily. That body has no heart. It has no weakness. Pain exploded across my stomach and I looked down to see Predium's fist buried in my gut. I wheezed, the last of the air pushed out of my lungs. God, this guy was fast. You've proven more of a liability than I expected. Take solace knowing that I will see to your death personally. An execution by a being of my stature is a pleasure few have shared. His hand, my brother's hand, gripped my neck. I grasped at it, pulled with every ounce of strength I had, the same strength that I had managed to move the impossibly heavy slab of stone with moments ago. But it was worthless. Predium hardly registered my resistance. I see it now. Your memories are split open to me, the crude things that they are. He flung me, and my neck snapped as he did. My body launched through the water, up into the air, soaring through the dark of the night, before landing amidst the trees in a crash of dirt and leaves. I groaned, still alive, but in so much pain. And so this is what Jake had gone through? I knew I wasn't dying, but did it make the experience any less shitty?
Fucking space demon.
I spat, blood leaking from my mouth, and then struggled to my feet. I couldn't move my head so much as an inch. Not good. I shifted my entire body sideways so I could see Predium, wearing my brother, and floating above the river, staring at me. Had he finished his ritual then? Or had I just managed to distract him? Given how pissed he looked, I was betting on the latter. So, Predium laughed, drifting towards me, hovering above the treetops. You've been speaking with your grandfather, have you?
Yeah, I have.
I swallowed, so the bastard really could read my memories. Had it happened when he grabbed my throat?
It's something that grandkids do from time to time.
I hated how weak my voice sounded, how weak my body felt compared to him, even after I'd thrown everything away to become a cryptid. After all of this, it still wasn't enough to face this guy on an even footing. He recommended you burn my body, was it?
Fuck.
In light of that, I think I'll give both of you a taste of your human depravity. You see, like Jake was a poor example of my vision, so too do you appear, Matthew. And yes, you too, Harold. In fact, it looks like the serum's penchant for sentience has rendered it quite useless in my world to come. Purple ribbons of light began dancing around Predium, casting my brother's face in a creepy, ethereal glow. I'll begin from scratch, regretful, perhaps, after all you've done to save this dying world, but necessary. The trees shifted, and I saw my grandfather's face grow in the trunks of all of those surrounding me. His eyebrows bristled, the indentations in the wood gazing up at Predium. Gaia was wrong to bring you about. I was wrong to speak of you to her. The text described you as benevolent, but you're as twisted as any devil. I assure you that you won't suffer your regret for too long. He spoke a word in a language I didn't know, and in a flash of red, orange, the treetops were lit ablaze. My grandma died and passed down her cabin to my brother and me. I just blew the last chance I had of fixing this shit show, and now the damn space demons lit the forest on fire. The finale. Let's get straight into that. Branches crackled and snapped overhead, falling to the forest floor in crashes of sparks and cinder. My grandpa's face in the tree trunks surrounding me howled. "You destroy the whole wood!" "That's the wonderful thing about this planet," Pretium said. "It always grows back without the madness of man. I suspect it'll return even more expansive, greener, and more full of life than ever before." He descended slowly, drifting through the flame-kissed canopy. "You see," he said, touching down on the dirt next to us. "In the world to come, I cannot allow you to whisper your poison into the minds of my children. You must be amputated from this earth, Harold."
"You'd fuck yourself if you could manage it, wouldn't you?" I said. "You really do love listening to your own bullshit."
Pretium glanced over his shoulder, staring at me for a moment before striking me in the chest with the back of his hand. I let out a wheeze as my body rocketed backwards, branches cutting at me as I cleared the tree line and crumpled onto the stone shore. Pain bloomed in my right ankle, and I looked down to see it was twisted in the entirely wrong direction.
Fuck!
Vampire or not, that didn't look good. I tried to stand back up, but only stumbled to the ground. My damn foot couldn't support my weight. I set my jaw, hating my big mouth. There was no way I was getting back to Pretium's corpse like this. The currents had been enough for a struggle for 2 working feet. If I tried to dive in now, I'd be at their mercy and probably end up getting diced apart on some rocks. I needed to do something though. I wasn't dead yet, and the flames were definitely getting hotter. If I let this drag out, I'd end up a pile of ash or some melted flesh on a grotesque skeleton. I may not have his corpse, but I did have one other option, and it was close at hand. The dagger. I took a moment to weigh my options before realizing I no longer had any. I grunted, crawling towards the blade.
"I'm sorry, Eric."
This wasn't the ending either of us wanted. Hell, I hadn't even wanted to come back to this nightmare cabin. But looking back, would it really have made any difference if we hadn't? Like Jake said, he would have just picked up some wayward hitchhikers and dosed them in our place. The world would have still been ending, but I would have get a chance to save it. I reached for the blade and gripped the leather hilt, breathing a sigh of relief. No agonizing burning sensations. Good. I rolled onto my side to get my bearings and then crawled towards Pretium, who was still speaking to my grandfather's face in the tree bark. As I neared them, I caught wind of their conversation. "I'm sorry," Grandpa said to Pretium. "To every damn person alive, sorry for even looking at those books when I should have tossed them in the blasted kiln and never looked back. I imagine you'll be arriving in the afterlife soon enough. You can tell them yourself." "You're a demon!" Grandpa's voice broke off as blazing sections of canopy fell from the treetops, crashing to the earth in a flurry of spark and flame. One damn near fell on top of me, kicking up red-hot cinders and searing my flesh, but I held my tongue, not daring to make a sound while I was so close to Pretium. "Sorry, Harold," Pretium said, breaking into a fit of laughter. "You were saying something." Go to hell," Grandpa groaned, flames licking at his face in the tree trunk. "It's all you deserve." "Hell is such a human concept, isn't it?" Pretium clasped his hands behind his back. "To live in a world so terrible and so full of horror that you'd create a place in your mind, even worse, just to feel more comfortable in your suffering. Truly insane." I crawled closer, using his words as cover for my movements. Well, that and the sky was falling. A heavy snap sounded above, and I froze. and then nearly shit myself as a branch smashed into a thicket next to me, exploding into a towering inferno. Fuck, that was close. Too close. The only insanity I see is what's standing in front of me, Grandpa said. You don't belong in this world. Now get out and leave us be. On the contrary. A splash sounded from the river, and then another one, and this time absolutely massive. Drops of water settled down from the treetops, and I paused. Now just a few feet away from Predium, the dagger still clutched firmly in my hand. I shifted my body sideways so that I could get a look at the water. The river wasn't far from us, but it was difficult to make out through the smoke. Focus, Matt. I had long since lost the luxury of worrying about splashes. I had to end this now and quickly. For Eric, for all of us. I raised the dagger, lurching another inch closer to Predium, and something crashed through the forest canopy, landed in a blazing thicket next to me, and with a wet thud, I froze. My mind was racing. In a short span of time I had seen that thing falling, I had almost certain that I recognized it. What I didn't understand was how it got into the air and out of the river. Because that thing was Predium's corpse. The cosmic dick didn't waste any time acknowledging it. His face snarled in rage, and he dashed towards his now softly smoking corpse, cursing in a language I didn't know or care to know. He didn't so much as look at me as he moved to step by me. I wouldn't be able to close the distance quick enough for a kill shot, but I could slow him down. Maybe long enough for his corpse to burn, and then I could get Eric out of here. We might both die in a forest fire, but that seemed a good deal better than being a slave to this jackass for the rest of eternity. I swung the dagger and it caught Predium unaware, right through his calf. He staggered to a knee, letting loose a feral roar, and steam hissed from the wound in the exact same way it had done when I used the scalpel on Nolan. Good, so Silver could hurt him. He wheeled on me, kicking the dagger free of my hand. You! He screamed. I smirked, happy that his arrogance, if nothing else, had given me the chance to deliver some kind of pain upon him. He reached down to grab me, but shock painted his features, and he fell forward, flat on his face. What the hell? I looked past him. A massive, long tentacle had wrapped itself around his leg, and was pulling him away from me. He spun around, kicking free of the appendage, and snapping it open in a shower of blood. It recoiled, racing back to where it had come from, racing back to the river. I squinted through the black smoke and my jaw dropped. A massive creature rose from the water, surrounded by an army of snapping tentacles. It looked like a sea monster or some kind of kraken. Was this another of Grandma's experiments? If it was, I had no idea they could get this titanic. Oh, what a lovely surprise, Predium growled, rising to his feet and staring daggers at the creature in the river. More insubordination, my favorite human flaw. Another tentacle flung out, but he dodged it easily. This time he placed his hands on it as it passed him, and then gripped it with a powerful squeeze, his fingers digging into its flesh. Letting loose a roar, he pulled the tentacle apart, drenching Eric in a crimson blood and causing the sea monster to writhe in agony. He seized his opening and dashed for his corpse, which now snapped and popped in a roaring flames. Before he could reach it, though, 3 more tentacles raced out, snatching him in their grasp and pulling him through the woods. His hands clutched at the dirt helplessly, desperately trying to grab onto anything he could, but it was useless. A moment later, the tentacles lifted him up and stole him from the tree line and over the river. He dangled there, pulling apart the appendages of the sea creature, but every time he did, 2 more would take their place. Eventually, the monster had him wrapped up in 10 of them, so much so that Predium's shouts of rage had been suffocated entirely. My memories came back to me. I recalled Jake and Grandma's conversation about Mum mentioning that she'd gone for a swim and had one last dose of the serum. They mentioned that during that horrible week, she had been watching us from the river. And then Then was that thing...
Mum?
I said weakly. The kraken squealed as Predium continued to tear it, quite literally, limb from limb. I looked around, searching for the dagger in case it came to it. I couldn't see it anywhere. Oh, there was so much chaos in the forest now. The blaze and the smoke made it impossible to discern much of anything. "He'll kill her." I looked up, seeing Grandpa's pained face in the tree bark in front of me. "He'll kill my sweet Alice, and then he'll come and pull his corpse free of the flames." He sounded so defeated, so morose.
The body's already burning. If she can hold him for a little longer.
An anguished scream rang out, followed by several deafening splashes, and through the trees I saw my mother collapse into the river, either dead or defeated.
"Mom!"
I shouted. "You have to stop him, Matthew. I'm unable to affect things as I am." I crawled towards her. "Make sure that corpse burns," Grandpa shouted. "You can't do anything for her, but you can still make the world right." Again, I felt a strange sensation of wanting to cry but being unable. I bashed my head on the ground, my body feeling so hot that I could barely think. The only thing that offered me any protection from that damn heat was my DNA and an old leather jacket, but even that barely covered half of my torso. Predium crashed in front of me, landing beside the thicket where his body burned. I had never seen him look desperate before, but he suddenly looked the part now. It made sense. He needed to save himself, and he didn't waste any time. He strode right into the flames, kneeling to retrieve his corpse. Thick black smoke billowed from the many-eyed abomination. It was melting, but slowly. How much longer would it take? It was clearly made of stronger stuff than human flesh. Predium turned and exited the inferno, and I saw just how much damage he had suffered. His eyes, once cold and flecked with gold, were now faded, empty things, and steam hissed from them, and from every other opening on his face, his mouth, his ears, and even his nose. He was dying. I just had to slow him down, only a little longer. I staggered to my feet, ignoring the anguish of standing on my snapped foot. He strode past me, so arrogant that he didn't even bother to look my way. I changed that. I lunged, swiping at him with a set of serrated claws, splitting open Eric's backside in a shower of sizzling blood. Well, that should slow him down some. He kept walking, unconcerned. The wounds on his backside healed nearly as soon as they appeared, the flesh stitching itself back together as though by magic.
"Wait!"
I shouted. I had to get his attention. I had to keep him here in the heat. We were so close, so damn close. This couldn't end with him just walking away.
"I said wait, you fucker!"
"Die in this fire, Matthew," Predium said, his voice echoing around the wood. He didn't so much as look over his shoulder at me. "You're unworthy of death by my hand." I opened my mouth to goad him again, but I knew it was hopeless. He wasn't as stupid as Jake. Without the dagger, I didn't have a way to stop him. I needed silver. Predium reached the clearing and stopped. Then his feet left the ground and he began drifting upwards. The son of a bitch was just going to fly out of here and leave the rest of us to die, and then turn the world into monsters. And I had let it all happen. I had gave up my humanity to stop this and set things right, and all I managed to do was convince Predium to start a forest fire. I had nothing left. I'd lost the dagger. I'd lost the fight. All I had was my old leather jacket and a heart full of regrets. Wait, my jacket. I swallowed all of my fear, prepared myself for the agony to come, and then launched myself at Predium. I soared through the air, my ankles screaming at me and my heartbeat thundering in my chest. I reached a hand inside my jacket and pain exploded across my palm. Tendrils of steam hissed from my closed fist as I rose my hand into the air, holding a silver scalpel I'd pocketed in the cave. I collided with Predium, catching him by surprise. and buried the scalpel into his back. He unleashed an otherworldly scream as the two of us plummeted back to earth, crashing to the dirt in a cloud of ash and cinder. I moved to reorientate myself, but he was faster. He dropped his corpse at his feet and reached for me, his eyes filled with a fury that I'd never seen before, and likely would never see again. I recoiled, knowing this was it. I was finished. But his arm? It never reached me. His hand hovered in mid-air between us, shaking, while his expression was a mess of confusion and rage. "Insubordinate vassal! Unhand me!" I didn't know what was going on, but I reached down, pulling Predium's corpse out from beneath him. He gazed helplessly at me, his whole body shaking as he willed it to respond, but it stayed locked in place. Was that Eric's doing? Oh, no time to think on that, and with a grunt I flung the many-eyed bastard back to the blazing thicket, its flames raging taller and fiercer than before. Predium screamed, and my brother must have lost his hold on him, because he stepped towards me. But he stumbled, steam now exploding from his eyes, his mouth, his ears. He roared into the night, his voice no longer the gentle, human thing it once resembled, but now infernal and horrible.
I am...
His body fell forward, landed with an unceremonious thud onto the forest floor, silent and unmoving.
Dead,
I said. I gazed down at my hand where I'd gripped the scalpel. The flesh had melted through to the bone, even in the small second that I'd held it. Turns out that silver trick really come in handy. I limped over to my brother and tore off a strip from his hoodie, wrapping it around his mouth and nose. Not much, but it might slow the smoke inhalation some.
Thanks, Uncle Nolan.
I wrapped my jacket around him for extra shielding and lifted Eric's comatose body into my arms. I looked back to the river shore where I knew my father still lay as a massive lumbering troll.
Oh, I'm sorry, Dad,
I said. I couldn't move him, not like this. There was hope for Eric, though. His face was ghostly white and his breathing was laboured, but he was alive. I needed to get us clear of this smoke and heat as fast as I could. Jake's truck could do the trick. It was nearby, tucked into the woods on the side of the road, not far from here. And if I could get to it, I had my money that the keys would still be in the ignition. I limped towards the road and through the woods, through the crumbling branches and the heat of the flames.
Thank you, Grandpa,
I called, not sure if he could hear me, or if he was even still alive. How much of the trees had to burn down before his soul died with them? "Don't thank me," said his voice. It was strained and hoarse. "You did good, son." I could faintly make out his face materializing on the bark of the trees through the smoke. "You make sure you boys get clear of here. You tell the world what happened."
Tell the world?
I said, stumbling as I made my way up the hillbank. Cutting straight through the wood meant getting to the truck quicker, but it also meant the terrain was untamed.
The hell would I want to do that for?
If my hunch is right, they're gonna be wondering. His face followed me, appearing on the trees as I limped through the wood. Predium, by my guess, didn't finish his ritual, but I bet he got at least partway there.
Partway there? Are you saying that some people might have turned?
His face crinkled in the bark. That's it. Yeah. If there's reports of strangeness or brutality out there, people need to be aware of what it could. His words tapered off, replaced by a long, pained groan. Of what it could mean, kid. Up ahead was Jake's truck. I could make out its bright white through the smoke of the trees.
I'll do that, Grandpa.
I turned to him as Eric and I cleared the tree line.
Goodbye.
Bye, Matthew. I pulled the truck's door handle and it opened. Unlocked. Good. That was a step one dealt with. I loaded Eric into the passenger seat and shut the door, making my way to the other side, and I slid in, My lanky vampire body hunched over and compressed, but I couldn't have been happier. The keys were dangling from the ignition. I turned them and the engine roared to life. The truck shook as a tree keeled over next to us, crashing in a flurry of sparks and flames. It was time to go. I slammed my foot on the gas and my brother and I tore away from the cabin and the blaze, and down the mountain road one last time. And so, I guess that brings us to now. A lot's happened since the drive down the mountain, but I'll try and fill in the blanks for you. But by the time we got clear of the blaze, the forest was swarming with first responders. I got their attention with a few blasts of the horn before beating a hasty retreat back into the woods. I'm mostly certain that nobody saw me. I didn't hear any screams, and I still haven't seen any found footage of a lanky vampire slinking into the tree line, so that's good. Grandpa's cabin I burned to ash, along with most of the mountain. Nobody found any sign of a Sasquatch or troll, or kraken for that matter, but I did find a strange cave with a lot of interesting books, as well as a dead man they've been unable to ID. Well, there's not much in the news about it, but there's word that the fire was caused by an occult ritual gone wrong, which is pretty bang on. Why, I headed up there about a month afterwards, once the investigation had wrapped up. I spent a few days wandering around up and down the river and calling out for Mom. I hadn't been certain Predium had killed her that night, but after the third day of nothing, I accepted that she was gone. I had lost her for a second time. I made a small memorial for her and everybody else. It wasn't much, just some twigs strapped together and some rocks piled up, but it was something to remember my family by. I always thought of them as absentee and aloof, unreliable. I figured that they were all gone or didn't care about my brother and I, but that night showed me how wrong I was. Our dad had driven 100 miles to get to the cabin and save our skin. Our mum had been watching over us from the river, and did her best to raise Eric while Jake was dosing him with serum. And Grandma and Grandpa didn't understand what they were getting into with Predium, and once Grandpa had realized, he gave me the information I needed to stop him. But Uncle Nolan? Well, he had been there from the start, since we were boys, trying to warn us and protect us, even while struggling with his own humanity. None of them were perfect, but when the chips were down, they showed up. To me, they're heroes. I missed them dearly. It's been a couple of months now. I understand that Eric's mostly recovered. Well, as much as can be. He has trouble walking and I see him struggle just getting to his car at times, but he seems happy to be alive. I don't know if he knows that I'm alive or knows what I've become. Sometimes, when I check up on him at night, I swear that he looks back at me. I wonder if he sees me there in the shadows, but he's never said anything or even really reacted. He just gets back to whatever he was doing. Every now and then, I catch bits of the news through old newspapers. I guess Eric told investigators that he and I had gone up to pack up our grandmother's things, but that the fire kicked up while I was out for a hike. He couldn't find me, but the blaze got so bad that he had to get himself back down the mountain. He says that he blacked out from the smoke inhalation just before the first responders got to him. Not a bad story, all things considered. The authorities believe it, and nobody's trying to pin him with any arson charges. The blame's fallen instead on the John Doe in the cave, a stranger they found surrounded by candles and ritual books. Even in death, Nolan's looking out for Eric. Actually, these days everybody's looking out for Eric. He's sort of become the de facto poster boy for tragedy in the country. The saddest guy around. Lost his mother as a kid, then his grandmother, and then when he went to clear up her effects, lost the rest of his family in a freak forest blaze. I'm sure he hates the attention, but it's better than the apocalypse. As for me, I'm getting used to being a monster. I think Jake must have taken a different serum to turn himself back into a man, because it's been a while now and I feel like I'm becoming less human as time goes on. My foot's healed though, and I'm back to leaping tall buildings in a single bound and racing locomotives. In fact, there's a train that runs through my new patch of woods, about 10 miles from where Grandma set up shop with her cabin. Oh, there's a lot of game for me to hunt out there, and I mostly stay out of the way of people. Mostly. It's getting harder these days. Deer blood and rabbit blood just doesn't have the same taste as Jake's did. And yes, he might have been a Sasquatch, but his blood was as human as could be. It tasted delicious. On that note, I'll be signing off with this last update. There's some hikers nearby and they're distracting the hell out of me. It's tough to focus when I'm near people, you know? It's like I can smell their blood through their skin. Fuck, that sounds creepy. But there it is. I am a vampire. What do you want from me? Seriously though, I hope they head back down the mountain soon. After all,
It's nearly dark.
Wow. Definitely another one. Wow. Absolutely riveting. What a fantastic tapestry of horror by the incredible Tales from the Cryptid. I have enjoyed this series immensely. Such creative writing, wonderful incorporation of the storyline and the backstory, all coming together into a huge finale. Awesome stuff. Really do look forward to more of your work in the future, Tales from the Cryptid. I'm sure the listeners have enjoyed this one as much as I. Guys and girls, you know the drill. As ever, please do let us know what you thought down below in the comments box. Please do like and share. It really does help both the channel and our community further. And why not hashtag TeamFEAR and DMT's Cryptid Crew. If you're an aspiring author or would just like to have a crack at things, why not get in touch with myself at the usual email as on screen, which is dmtforestofear@gmail.com. And I look forward to hearing from you. I hope you guys are all doing well, had a cracking week at school or work, whatever it is that you do, and are trying to keep fit and focused as possible during these testing times. But above all, remember, be safe, not sorry.